When I was 20 or so, I took this leaflet from a music fair. This amplifier for me was an interesting, innovative product. A couple of years ago, I was in a music store in Finland with my dear friend Jukka. I saw this same amplifier for sale in the vintage department. This made me think that over the years, since I took this leaflet, probably I also had become vintage like the amplifier. But more important, this brings us to a long debated question. How old should an instrument be to be called vintage? When does an old used guitar become vintage? The word vintage was borrowed from enology used to indicate a wine's harvest year. In a broad sense, the term is used for products at least 20 or 25 years old. It applies especially to old-fashioned items that are re-evaluated over time so that they become desirable or collectible. In guitar language, the term vintage generally holds a different connotation. The significance goes beyond merely how old an instrument is and in which year it was produced. It's reasonable to state that today the word commonly refers not just to age, but more properly to indicate a well-defined period of manufacture. In fact, the term applies to quality or design instruments made in the golden age of modern guitar building. Many experts individuate this period in the 50 years from the mid-1920s to early mid-1970s. Guitars made prior to the mid-1920s but appear too ancient in design compared to today's standards, and probably they would be better defined antiques. But why guitars built after the 1970s, no matter how old they are, will never make it to the status of vintage instruments? In 1964, the demand for electrified music instruments started to increase dramatically, as we've seen in BTR number 14. All the leading companies in the market had to face a new challenge: increasing the production in order to keep pace with the wider demand. This meant to modernize manufacturing plants and to rearrange personnel and manufacturing process. None of those companies had the financial strength for such huge investment. Also, some producers thought that the popular interest around electric guitars could be just a short-lived phenomenon or fashion. They were not sure about the future of their market. Companies like Fender, Vox Jennings, Gibson, Danelectro, Gretsch and others shared a similar destiny. They all were acquired by strong conglomerates. These new managements had the priority of making the production more profitable. They needed to optimize the manufacturing process to meet the big numbers commanded by the new popular demand. This, unfortunately, is not conducive to manufacturing high-quality instruments. Furthermore, at the end of the 60s, sourcing quality old-growth wood was becoming more and more difficult. The choice of materials had become critical and expensive. In essence, the guitars market was entering an era characterized by corporate aggressive profit management and decreasing product quality. The Gibson company, in particular, started this transformation process in 1966, when the former president Ted McCarty and his vice president resigned. In 1969, the company closed bankruptcy ended up in the hands of the Norlin Industries. The Norlin takeover was formalized in 1974. The new owner's business ranged from broadly defined technology to brewing beer in Panama. The Les Paul Deluxe model was launched in this scenario. The troublesome situation of this transitional period has led to some confusion. Many folks today think that every guitar produced in the 1970s or even in the late 60s is crap. I'm trying to demonstrate that this is absolutely not true. As we've seen in BTR number 15, early in 1961, the single cutaway Les Paul was discontinued due to lack of sales. In summer 1968, it was reintroduced by popular demand. The first Les Pauls produced in 1968 were almost similar to those of the Ted McCarty era. In fact, the 1968 Les Pauls predate the less desirable production changes that were carried out in the following years during the infamous Norlin mismanagement. Shortly after its reintroduction, the Les Paul slowly shifted away from the 50s concept and received distinct features. The Les Paul Deluxe, introduced in 1969, is part of this transitional process. Let's check out these changes. In 1968, the Les Paul line consisted of two versions: the custom with humbucker pickups and the gold top model reminiscent of the 1956 Les Paul model with P90s pickups. After the first year of production, Gibson took notice that guitar players wanted humbucker pickups on their gold top models. Still, Gibson probably wanted to keep apart the two versions. They might have wanted to reserve the full-size humbuckers for the more expensive custom, so they decided for a compromise. They put on the new Deluxe small-sized humbuckers fitting in the same routings for the P90s. This type of pickups were previously used for a few Epiphone models: the Wilshire, the Crestwood, and the semi-acoustics with Italian names Riviera and Sorrento. These Epiphone models were discontinued by the end of the 1960s, so Gibson could count on a surplus stock of leftover pickups. This is an Epiphone Mini-Humbucker from the early 60s, carries a patent applied for sticker. My dear friend Carlo Curci kindly lent me his Les Paul. It started its life in 1969 as a Deluxe, but didn't make it through time unmodified. Unfortunately, Carlo received it in poor conditions, and in the mid-70s converted it to a standard with full-size humbuckers and tobacco sunburst color. He also changed the truss rod cover accordingly. The tuners were also changed and are not original. Still, this guitar is an excellent player with a strong tone. The headstock bears the typical 1969 Boulder Pearl logo without the dot on the eye. This guitar clearly shows the changes introduced in the course of that year. Gibson changed the neck construction technique. They switched from the traditional one-piece mahogany to a stronger three-piece laminate. By around the same time, the shape of the headstock was slightly enlarged. The headstock angle has a shallower pitch of 14 degrees, as opposed to the steeper pitch of 17 degrees on 50s Les Paul and contemporary models. Also, the long neck tenon was shortened. On 50s Les Paul Customs and Standards, the tenon is a prominent neck appendix that extends well into the neck pickup cavity. The neck tenon of the Deluxe is shorter and does not protrude significantly. It's generally referred to as transitional tenon. It becomes shorter on later models. Another important change introduced in late 1969 was the so-called pancake body construction. The body of this Deluxe is built in 3 pieces. A thin sheet of maple is sandwiched between 2 mahogany slabs with different grain orientation. This process, technically named cross-banding, would give more structural stability. Someone assumed that this process allowed to use leftover mahogany slabs originally cut for thinner SG bodies. Also, the maple top presents a shallower dome carve. The revived Les Paul from the late 60s has a different cutaway binding than the originals. In the guitars from the 50s and in contemporary models, the binding around the body presents uniform height. The maple top joint is left visible in the cutaway. In late 60s Les Pauls, they decided to cover the maple top joint, therefore the body binding is enlarged in correspondence of the cutaway. The original ABR-1 bridge from the mid-late 60s comes with nylon saddles. Some players prefer their warmer tone and mellower attack. As a heavy-handed guitar player, I generally tend to favor metal saddles. This awesome Les Paul Deluxe left the Gibson factory in Kalamazoo, Michigan in 1970. I think it's one of the last without a Made in USA stamp. I borrowed this Deluxe from my friend Giacomo Bagorda. It belonged to our beloved departed friend Gianni Bucci, who had acquired it from the original owner and passed it to his brother. It's just back from a refracting, restoring and setup work. As you can see, in 1970, the Gibson necks started to present the so-called lump or volute. It was intended to strengthen the weak spot between neck and headstock. It's less protruding on earlier models, like this one, while becomes more pronounced on later models until 1981. What we note in this 3-piece deluxe body is that the thin layer in the pancake looks much darker than maple, suggesting the idea it may be walnut or similar wood. Gibson aficionados have never seen favorably all these changes introduced between 1969 and 1970. For instance, the shorter neck tenon is generally considered less indicated for sustain and strength. So, why are the deluxe models from the early 70s still so appreciated in the vintage market? The reason is that, in spite of the generally disliked changes, these guitars can still sound great. In fact, even though these Les Pauls cannot keep up with the high-quality standard of production of the previous decades, still they are regarded as the last desirable vintage Les Paul. This 1970 Deluxe is an example. It is still made with high-quality materials. The wood for body and neck is old Honduran mahogany. The Mini-Humbucker pickups have good dynamics and tonal character. The Sprague Black Beauty caps found in the tone circuit of these guitars are substantially identical to the famous Bumblebee caps from the 50s, and the pots retain the value of 500K as opposed to 300K darker sounding on later models from the 70s. The chrome-plated hardware is lightweight and resonant. The tuners are still the same Cluson Double brand introduced in 1964 that would be soon replaced for the less efficient tuners with a Gibson brand. As a merely cosmetic feature, the mother of pearl trapezoid inlays of this fretboard are way more flashy than those on the current reissues. The Les Paul Deluxe was a great commercial success and was produced and sold in huge quantities even after the reintroduction of the Les Paul standard with full-sized humbuckers in 1974. The guitar was used a lot in the hard rock and European prog rock music scenes of those years. Yet Pete Townshend of The Who is one of the few notable players or testimonials of the Deluxe played with original Mini-Humbuckers. Many guitar players preferred to route the pickup cavities of their Deluxes for full-sized humbuckers. Jimmy Page, for example, has in his arsenal of favorites a nice Deluxe refinished in purple with humbuckers. The Made in USA stamp, introduced on the back of the headstock between late 1970 and 1971, is often used as a dividing line to differentiate the less desirable production of the 1970s. As we go through the following years, more unwelcome changes arrive. In 1975, maple was used instead of mahogany for the neck construction. Many experts indicate the introduction of Gibson maple necks as the end of the era of vintage Les Pauls. Don't hesitate to let me know any opinion and impression in the comments below or in our Facebook group. Take a moment to subscribe to the BTR channel and hit the bell to keep posted about the next episodes.